The gentle tendrils of smoke from the charcoal grill carried the robust aroma of hickory and seasoned brisket across the impeccably kept grounds of Oakage Estates. For retired Army Ranger David Henderson, this tranquil Sunday afternoon was meant to be a well-earned respite after years of conflict. Instead, it transformed into a confrontation. David stood on his newly manicured lawn, a pair of stainless steel tongs in his grasp. At 34 years old, the former Army captain had spent the majority of his 20s in environments where the air tasted of dust and cordite. He had completed 2 arduous combat deployments in Afghanistan, navigating the perilous terrains of the Korengal Valley and the volatile districts of Helmand Province. The scars, both visible jagged silver lines across his left shoulder and invisible ones that occasionally surfaced in sleepless nights, bore testament to his service. Yet today was a good day, a significant milestone. Just 3 weeks prior, David had finalized the purchase of this 4-bedroom colonial home in Oakage Estates, an affluent and serene suburb nestled in the heart of Ohio. He had utilized his VA loan, combined with years of disciplined saving, to acquire his piece of the American dream. The neighborhood exuded pristine order, characterized by mature oak trees, perfectly aligned mailboxes, and a profound, resonant silence that David found deeply restorative. He had dedicated the morning to gardening, a burgeoning hobby that grounded him before firing up the heavy-duty offset smoker he had gifted himself as a housewarming present. The brisket had been smoking for 8 hours. David checked the internal temperature, a nod of satisfaction as the digital thermometer registered 195 degrees. He was dressed casually in athletic shorts, a faded gray t-shirt, and slip-on canvas shoes, a faint, soulful jazz tune emanating from a small Bluetooth speaker on the patio table. For the first time in a very long time, his nervous system was completely at ease. 2 streets away, the atmosphere within Squad Car Unit 412 was anything but peaceful. Officer Craig Stanwood drummed his thick fingers against the steering wheel, his jaw set in a perpetual clench of irritation. Stanwood, a 12-year veteran of the local police department, had cultivated a reputation within the precinct for his uncompromising and aggressive policing methods. He viewed the world through a deeply cynical lens, rigidly categorizing the citizens he was sworn to protect into us and them. Riding shotgun was Officer Timothy Walsh, a 23-year-old rookie with barely 6 months on the force. Walsh was eager, observant, and fundamentally decent, though he was rapidly learning that surviving his probationary period required biting his tongue when his training officer embarked on one of his frequent acrimonious tirades. The police radio crackled, disrupting the tense quietude in the cruiser. Unit 412. We have a 10 to 10 call in your vicinity. Caller reports a suspicious individual at 404 Maple Drive. Subject is in the backyard. Caller states he appears to be trespassing. Stanwood snatched the radio microphone. 412 responding. Who's the caller? Dispatch. Caller is Beatrice Gable. Resides at 402 Maple Drive. States the property at 404 recently sold, and the current occupant of the backyard does not. The dispatcher paused, a hint of discomfort coloring her professional tone. That does not appear to be the new homeowner. Stanwood tossed the microphone back onto the dashboard and threw the cruiser into gear, accelerating aggressively. Figures, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Nice neighborhood like this. You leave a property empty for a week and the squatters move right in. Probably scoping the place out to strip the copper wire. Walsh shifted uneasily in his seat. The dispatcher said the house was sold, Craig. Maybe it's just the new owner, moving in Oakage. Stanwood scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Beatrice Gable has lived on that street for 30 years. She knows everyone. If she says the guy doesn't belong, he doesn't belong. You let me handle the talking. Rook, keep your eyes open." Stanwood pulled the cruiser to the curb at 404 Maple Drive, parking at a sharp angle that partially blocked the driveway. He did not activate the sirens or lights. He preferred the element of surprise. The house was beautiful, with a freshly painted white exterior and dark blue shutters. There were no moving boxes visible on the porch, no car in the driveway. David had parked his truck in the closed garage. Stanwood unhooked the retention strap on his holster as he stepped out of the vehicle, a subconscious habit that always set Walsh on edge. "Check the front," Stanwood ordered in a low voice. "I'm going around the side gate, Craig." "Wait, shouldn't we knock first?" Walsh asked, hurrying to keep up with the older officer's long, determined strides. "If we just walk into the backyard, that's curtilage. We need probable cause or exigent circumstances." Stanwood stopped and glared at the rookie, his face flushing. "I have a caller reporting a trespasser in progress. That's all the cause I need. Are you going to quote case law at me, or are you going to back me up?" Walsh swallowed hard, his academy training warring with the unwritten rules of the Brotherhood. "I'm with you," he mumbled. Stanwood turned and marched down the side of the house. A tall, solid wooden privacy fence separated the front yard from the back. A simple iron latch held the gate closed. Without a moment's hesitation, Stanwood reached over, flipped the latch, and pushed the gate open. Stepping onto the private property of Captain David Henderson, David heard the metallic clatter of the gate latch before he saw the officers. His military-honed instincts kicked in instantly. The jazz music faded into the background as his situational awareness sharpened. He turned away from the smoker, the metal tongs still in his right hand, just as Officer Stanwood rounded the corner with Walsh a few steps behind him. Stanwood's eyes locked onto David. He took in the sight of the tall, broad-shouldered black man standing by the grill. The officer's posture instantly became rigid, his hand resting aggressively on the butt of his sidearm. "Hey, drop it. Drop what's in your hand right now," Stanwood barked, his voice echoing loudly across the peaceful yard. David looked at the tongs in his hand, then back to the officer. His face remained entirely impassive, a mask of calm he had perfected while negotiating with warlords and coordinating airstrikes under heavy fire. He didn't make any sudden movements. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the tongs on the wooden side table of the smoker. "Can I help you, officers?" David asked, his voice deep, resonant, and completely devoid of panic. "Step away from the grill. Keep your hands where I can see them," Stanwood commanded, advancing further onto the patio. Walsh stood near the gate, looking nervously between his partner and the man at the grill. David took one step back, crossing his arms over his chest. "I asked how I can help you. You're standing in my backyard." "This isn't your backyard," Stanwood sneered, closing the distance until he was only a few feet away. He was a large man, but David was taller, and the physical proximity seemed to agitate the officer even more. "We got a call about a trespasser on this property. You need to provide identification right now." "A trespasser?" David raised an eyebrow. He glanced toward the fence line shared with 402 Maple Drive. He could just make out the flutter of a floral curtain in the second-story window next door. Beatrice. He had waved to the older woman twice since moving in, and both times she had quickly hurried inside without acknowledging him. "I think your caller made a mistake. I'm the homeowner. My name is David Henderson. I closed on this house 3 weeks ago." "I don't care what story you're spinning," Stanwood said, his voice dripping with condescension. "People like you don't just close on houses in Oakage. I'd now, before I put you in handcuffs for obstruction." Walsh stepped forward tentatively. "Sir, if you could just show us your driver's license, we can clear this whole thing up and get out of your hair." David looked at the younger officer. He saw the hesitation in Walsh's eyes, the uncomfortable realization that this situation was fundamentally wrong. "Officer David," he addressed Walsh politely, "I am standing on my own private property. I am cooking my dinner. I have committed no crime, nor is there any reasonable suspicion that I have committed a crime. Under the Fourth Amendment, I am not obligated to identify myself to you while I am legally occupying my own home. Furthermore, you breached my locked gate without a warrant. You are currently trespassing." Stanwood's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. The calm, authoritative manner in which David spoke, the undeniable fact that this man knew his rights better than the officer did, ignited a furious ego trip within Stanwood. "Listen to me, you arrogant punk," Stanwood hissed, stepping into David's personal space, his chest puffed out. "You don't tell me the law. I am the law out here. You are going to give me your ID, or I'm going to take you down to the pavement." For a fleeting second, the quiet backyard faded. David felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the cold, hyper-focused clarity of combat. He analyzed Stanwood's stance. Off balance, heavy-footed, angry. David knew with absolute certainty that he could disarm the officer and drop him to the grass in less than 3 seconds. The kinetic pathways of his CQC training hummed in his muscles, but David was also acutely aware of the reality of his situation. He was a black man in America confronting an aggressive, armed police officer in a secluded backyard. If he fought back, even in self-defense, he would likely be shot. If he survived, he would be branded a monster. He had survived the Taliban. He wasn't going to let a racist, small-town cop be the one to end his life. David let out a slow, measured breath. Suppressing the warrior and engaging the strategist, he uncrossed his arms and held his hands out, palms open and empty. "My wallet is inside the house on the kitchen counter," David said calmly. "I am not going to retrieve it because I do not consent to this unlawful detention. If you believe you have the legal right to arrest me for barbecuing in my own yard, then do it. But know that you are making a catastrophic mistake." Stanwood didn't hesitate. He seized David's left arm, wrenching it roughly behind the veteran's back. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer." "Craig, wait!" Walsh protested, taking a step forward. "He's not resisting. We can just run the address through dispatch. Check the property records." "Shut up and grab his other arm, Walsh," Stanwood roared, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Reluctantly, Walsh stepped forward and took David's right arm. David offered absolutely no physical resistance. He allowed the rookie to guide his arm backward. As Walsh clicked the steel cuff shut over David's right wrist, David turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the young officer. "Pay close attention to what is happening right now, Officer Walsh," David said quietly, his voice carrying the commanding weight of a military officer. "Memorize the time. Memorize what was said, because when the dust settles on this, you are going to be sitting in a deposition chair under oath, and your career will depend on whether you tell the truth about what your partner did today." Walsh swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as the cuffs ratcheted tight. I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, so only David could hear. Stanwood shoved David forward toward the gate. "Keep your mouth shut, criminal. You don't threaten my partner." As they marched David out of his backyard, leaving the smoker puffing fragrant clouds into the evening air, neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Across the street, a man walking a golden retriever stopped and stared. Next door, Beatrice Gable stood unabashedly on her front porch, arms crossed, a look of vindicated satisfaction on her face as she watched the suspicious man being paraded in handcuffs. David kept his head high, his posture impeccably straight. He didn't look at the neighbors. He didn't argue with Stanwood as the officer roughly patted him down against the side of the cruiser, emptying his pockets of his house keys and a cell phone. "In the back," Stanwood ordered, pressing a heavy hand onto the top of David's head to force him into the cramped back seat of the squad car. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing David inside the cage. The air conditioning was broken in the back, and the air was stifling. Through the plexiglass divider, he watched Stanwood climb into the driver's seat, looking remarkably pleased with himself. "See, Rook," Stanwood said to Walsh as he put the car in drive. "That's how you handle these types. You show them who runs the streets, give them an inch, and they think they own the whole damn neighborhood." Walsh didn't reply. He stared out the passenger window, a knot of deep dread forming in his stomach. In the back seat, David leaned his head against the hard plastic partition. He was uncomfortable, his wrists pinched by the overly tight metal cuffs. But as the cruiser pulled away from his beautiful new home, David wasn't feeling fear or even anger. He was feeling profoundly, ruthlessly focused. Officer Craig Stanwood thought he had just asserted his dominance over an easy target. He had no idea that he had just unlawfully arrested a decorated military captain who possessed the resources, the patience, and the absolute unyielding discipline to dismantle Stanwood's life, his career, and the department's corrupt culture brick by brick. The war hadn't ended for David Henderson. The battlefield had simply changed, and the trap was already set. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the holding area of the Oakage Police Department, casting a sickly, pale, yellow glare over the scuffed linoleum floor. David Henderson sat on a bolted-down steel bench, his wrists still bound behind him, his posture impossibly straight. He hadn't spoken a single word during the entire ride to the precinct, nor had he reacted when Officer Craig Stanwood shoved him through the back doors. Desk Sergeant Thomas Miller, a 20-year veteran with a receding hairline and a perpetually exhausted expression, looked up from his computer monitor as Stanwood swaggered up to the booking counter. Officer Timothy Walsh trailed behind, looking as though he were walking to his own execution. "Got a live one for you, Tom," Stanwood announced, slapping his palms on the high counter. "Trespassing, failure to identify, and resisting an officer. Picked him up over on Maple Drive." Miller peered over his reading glasses at the quiet, imposing man sitting on the bench. "Maple Drive? You mean the Oakage Estates subdivision? Who's he trespassing on?" "Some new homeowner who hasn't moved in yet," Stanwood replied dismissively. "Beatrice Gable called it in. Guy was in the backyard using the grill like he owned the place. Refused to hand over his ID when I gave a lawful order." Miller frowned, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Did you verify the property records, Craig? We have a direct terminal to the county clerk right here." "Didn't need to," Stanwood snapped, his ego flaring at the questioning. "I had a witness report and the suspect was uncooperative. He claimed his wallet was in the house, like I'm going to let an unsecured suspect walk into a residence I haven't cleared." Walsh cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. "Sergeant, the suspect, he stated his name is David Henderson. He claims he closed on the house 3 weeks ago." Miller's fingers hit the keys. The clacking sound echoed in the quiet room. A tense silence stretched for 30 seconds. Miller's eyes widened slightly as he read the screen. He scrolled down, blinked, and read it again. "Craig," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, completely devoid of its usual casual tone. "The deed for 404 Maple Drive was recorded 21 days ago. The registered owner is David Alexander Henderson." Stanwood's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into a scowl. So, he knew the owner's name. Big deal. He probably looked it up online to use as a cover. I'm telling you, the guy doesn't fit the profile for that neighborhood. "Profile." David's deep, steady voice cut across the room. Both officers and the sergeant turned to look at him. "Is that the official terminology you're using for my skin color? Officer Stanwood, I want my phone call now." Stanwood took a step toward the bench, pointing a thick finger. "You don't make demands here, buddy." "Let him make the call, Craig," Miller interrupted sharply. "Right now, we need to verify his identity immediately." Reluctantly, Stanwood uncuffed David's right hand, attaching the left to the steel bar on the wall, and shoved a landline receiver toward him. David dialed a number from memory. It didn't go to a family member or a bail bondsman. It went directly to the personal cell phone of Arthur Sterling. Sterling was not a public defender. He was the managing partner of Sterling, Hayes, and Montgomery, one of the most ruthless and prestigious civil rights litigation firms in the state of Ohio. He was also a former JAG officer who had worked alongside David during a joint task force operation in Kabul. "Arthur, it's David Henderson," David said calmly into the receiver. "I'm at the Oak Ridge Police Department. I've been arrested for barbecuing in my own backyard." He paused, listening to the sharp, incredulous response on the other end. "Yes, arresting officer is Craig Stanwood. No warrant. Bypassed a locked gate. Unlawful detainment. False arrest. I need you here." David hung up the phone and sat back against the cold cinder block wall. "My attorney is on his way. I will not be answering any questions, but I suggest you call your chief of police. He's going to want to be awake for this." Within 45 minutes, the atmosphere in the precinct shifted from mundane paperwork to absolute panic. Arthur Sterling marched through the double doors of the station like a localized hurricane. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase and projecting an aura of absolute legal terror. Trailing just behind him, looking deeply displeased about being dragged out of his home on a Sunday evening, was Oak Ridge Police Chief William Reynolds. "Where is my client?" Sterling demanded, his voice ringing through the lobby. Chief Reynolds bypassed the front desk and walked straight into the holding area, his face pale as he saw David still handcuffed to the bench. "Captain Henderson?" Reynolds asked, his voice tight. Stanwood, who had been filling out an arrest report in the corner, stood up bewildered. "Chief, what are you doing here? And why are you calling this suspect captain?" "Because, you absolute imbecile," Sterling hissed, stepping right into Stanwood's personal space. "My client is Captain David Henderson, United States Army Rangers, retired. He is a twice-decorated Silver Star recipient and currently serves as a senior tactical advisor for the Department of Defense. And you, officer, have just committed a textbook felony deprivation of rights under color of law. Unlock him now." Chief Reynolds barked at Stanwood. Stanwood fumbled with his keys, his hands suddenly shaking as the catastrophic reality of the situation began to dawn on him. He unlocked the cuff. David stood up, massaging his left wrist, his expression still an unreadable mask of calm. "Chief Reynolds," David said politely, "I apologize for ruining your Sunday evening. However, your officer here bypassed a locked privacy gate onto my curtilage without a warrant, exigent circumstances, or probable cause. My declarations of residency were disregarded. I was physically assaulted and then taken into custody based on a phone call from a neighbor who harbored a prejudice against the shade of my complexion. He was on my property unlawfully," Stanwood contended feebly, a note of desperation creeping into his tone. "Beatty Gable stated that Beatrice Gable does not issue arrest warrants." Sterling interjected with practiced ease, opening his attaché case. "Furthermore, my client's residence is equipped with a state-of-the-art closed-circuit surveillance system. It captures video in 40K resolution and audio in high definition. I've already accessed the cloud-based recordings via my tablet. The entirety of the encounter, including your partner's attempt to intervene and your explicit threats, is currently stored on a secure server." Stanwood visibly paled, the color draining entirely from his face. He glanced at Walsh. The junior officer was looking at the floor, avoiding any eye contact. "We are initiating a substantial civil rights action against you personally, Officer Stanwood," Sterling continued, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "We will be circumventing your qualified immunity because the legal precedent regarding curtilage is unequivocally established. Additionally, we are submitting the footage to District Attorney Sarah Kensington for criminal prosecution. You are finished." The repercussions were immediate, severe, and utterly unforgiving. David Henderson sought more than a mere apology. He aimed to surgically excise a malignancy from his community. By Monday morning, the 40K video recording of the arrest was the headline on every major news outlet. Reporter Chloe Carmichael of Channel 8 News broke the exclusive, broadcasting the clear audio of David calmly asserting his rights while Stanwood aggressively escalated the confrontation. The stark contrast between the decorated black veteran holding barbecue tongs and the red-faced, aggressive police officer ignited a conflagration of public indignation. Chief Reynolds placed Stanwood on unpaid administrative leave by midday. By Wednesday, after the Internal Affairs Division had thoroughly reviewed the footage, Stanwood was officially dismissed. However, the forfeiture of his badge was merely the prelude to his ordeal. Because Stanwood had infringed upon a clearly defined constitutional prerogative by entering a secured backyard without a warrant or exigent circumstances, the federal judge presiding over David's civil litigation ruled that qualified immunity was inapplicable. Stanwood was deemed personally accountable. The police union, recognizing the utterly indefensible nature of the footage and the catastrophic public relations crisis, quietly rescinded their legal backing. To cover his escalating legal expenditures, Stanwood was compelled to deplete his savings and remortgage his residence. 2 months later, District Attorney Sarah Kensington formally charged him with official oppression and unlawful detention. Confronted with an assured conviction by a jury that had already witnessed the viral video, Stanwood accepted a plea agreement, forfeiting his pension, receiving a 3-year probationary sentence, and being permanently prohibited from holding any position in law enforcement or private security. Retribution found him during the frigid Ohio winter. Deprived of his authority and his standing within the community, Craig Stanwood found himself operating the late-night shift as a forklift operator at a scrap metal processing facility, a post where he endured freezing temperatures and took directives from a supervisor half his age. Officer Timothy Walsh faced a different outcome. During his sworn testimony, Walsh recounted the unvarnished truth. He detailed Stanwood's aggressive profiling tactics, his refusal to verify property ownership records, and his own dereliction in preventing his superior officer's misconduct. Due to his full cooperation, and because David specifically pleaded for leniency on his behalf, Walsh retained his employment, was reassigned, underwent further training, and now carries the profound, indelible lesson of what transpires when honorable individuals remain passive observers. The scales of justice also tipped against the occupants of 402 Maple Drive. Beatrice Gable became an ostracized figure. The neighborhood association, apprehensive of being perceived as complicit in her overt bigotry, formally censured her. David's actions did not cease there. Arthur Sterling initiated a civil suit against Beatrice for defamation and filing a fraudulent police report. The legal pressure and the unceasing public condemnation from her neighbors eroded her composure. 6 months following the incident, a for sale sign materialized on her front lawn. She sold the property at a financial loss and relocated, vanishing into obscurity. As for David Henderson, he accepted the modest settlement offered by the municipality and allocated every cent of it to a legal defense fund established for marginalized veterans. A year later, the inviting aroma of hickory smoke once again wafted across the meticulously maintained lawns of Oakage Estates. David stood in his backyard, barbecue tongs in hand, tending to a sizable rack of ribs. Soft jazz music played in the background. This time, however, his backyard was teeming with people. Neighbors mingled and conversed on the patio. Chief Reynolds was present, a paper plate in hand, engaged in a serious discussion with Arthur Sterling. David surveyed the gathering, feeling the firm, reassuring contact of his property's earth beneath his feet. He had fought across distant continents to safeguard his nation's liberties, and he had fought right here on his own homestead to ensure those very freedoms extended to him. The conflict was concluded, the struggle had been won, and the brisket was finally ready. Justice is seldom a spontaneous event. It is a process initiated by those possessing the fortitude to uphold their principles. David Henderson transformed an instance of profound injustice into an exemplary demonstration of accountability, proving that true influence resides not in vociferousness or aggression, but in steadfast resolve and the unyielding pursuit of truth. The dust settled, the culpable faced consequences, and the upright reclaimed their tranquility.